Craigslist roommate makes me the subject of a mental breakdown. About 2 years ago, I moved into a new apartment. The walls were very thin, and because of the fire safety laws in my city, my bedroom had one window, which led into the living room, and none with outside access. The window will be important later. It was 3 bedrooms, one for me, one for the master tenant, and one spare, which at the time was rented out by a pretty friendly guy. Well, friendly guy had issues with his work visa and had to move back to Canada last minute, leaving us about 2 weeks to find another roommate. Our quickest and easiest option was Craigslist. Due to my work schedule, I had no part in the selection process, but was content when the new roommate moved in a little later. He seemed a bit off, but friendly. He was a very tall, large guy but pretty quiet, and not someone I wanted to go out of my way to hang with, but was okay to be around and be cordial with. About 2 weeks into his move-in, the master tenant left for Hawaii, leaving him and I alone in the home for the month-long duration of his stay. For the first few days, things are normal. All of a sudden, about 4 days into the trip, I am woken up at about 8 a.m. to a frantic knocking at my door. Roommate, we'll call him Kyle, is standing there when I open up, looking frazzled. He looks me dead in the eye and says, "So do you want to tell me what went on last night?" To which I was shocked and confused, because I had come home from work at about 9 p.m. and immediately showered and went to bed. I explained this to him and he tells me that he heard me screaming and arguing with someone in my room. That he saw me in the side alley out the window, arguing with our landlord, whom I'd never even seen at that point, that he heard people coming in and out of our house. I tell him no way, none of that ever happened. After staring at me for a little longer, he leaves and doesn't bring it up again. The next morning, I wake up to the same thing. This time he says he saw me arguing with my boyfriend. I was single at the time, had seen me talking with our other roommate, who's in Hawaii, and asking me for the badge number of the officer I'd spoken to, since he had apparently seen me talking to a bunch of police as well. This time, I get angry and more or less tell him to cut this shit out, because I'm not doing anything and don't know what he's talking about. He gets a weird look on his face and says, "I think I had a seizure in my sleep. The next time it happens, call an ambulance." And leaves for a bit, only to start knocking again about an hour later, and when I open up, Kyle repeats the exact same story verbatim. This happens once more before I tell him to leave me the fuck alone, and leave for work. I go to work as normal, and I am reluctant to return that night, but I'm too tired to switch to an alternate location. Big mistake. About 1 a.m., I wake up to slamming doors. Kyle is pacing back and forth between his bedroom, the living room, and out the front door. Walking in and out of each room, turning the lights on and off, mumbling angrily, and slamming the doors. I can see his figure pacing back and forth through the frosted window in my room that leads to the living room. Since my room is dark, he cannot see inside. Suddenly he screams, "I can't live like this, why are you doing this to me?" I think he's on the phone, and don't respond. A few moments later, he screams my name repeatedly and I realize he's directing it towards me. I knew I had to get the fuck out of there, so I very quietly creep out of bed and start getting dressed and packing a bag of clothes for work in the morning. I'm almost done when he screams, "I hear you," and charges over to my room, slapping the wall next to my door but not touching the door itself. I look towards my window and see his shadow lean all the way forward, pressing his ear against the glass. I was fucking terrified and sat completely still, unmoving. He eventually screams my name again and moves away from the window, and I hear him start pacing between rooms again. Now, my shoes are kept on a rack outside my door, and not inside my room, so I know that when I leave I'm going to need a moment to put them on. I decide to wait until his pacing takes him out the front door again. At which time I plan to grab my shoes, put them on and run. As I'm formulating this plan, the pacing stops. He screams, "Do you want to fucking fight about this? Come out right now and we'll fight, I swear to God." I'm very small, 5 feet 0 inches girl, and this guy is easily 3x my size, so I am definitely not looking to fight, thanks. After a few minutes, he turns off all the lights, and I hear the door to his room open and close, followed by silence. I wait for a moment to be sure I can't hear any movement, and then decide to take my chance. I took a breath, and pulled my door open quickly. I step out and grab my shoes before I look up a second later, and see him standing shirtless, with just a pair of boxers and sock on, in the dark of the hallway, his arms hung slightly outward in an awkward position. He says in a low, calm voice, "Man, we need to talk." That was a hard no from me, so I grab my shoes and run out the door with them in hand. I run about a half block barefoot before I stop to put them on. When I look back, he is standing in the porch light of our front door, watching me run but not moving. Luckily, I had a friend who lived 2 blocks away, and I had their spare key, so I let myself in and crashed there for the night. And that's where I stayed for the next week or so while we worked things out with the master tenant, and Kyle agreed to move out within the week. He says he doesn't remember anything that happened, or wasn't sure if it was real or not. But if I said that's what went down, then it must be real. The day Kyle left, he sends me a photo of the house key sitting on the table, and says, "I'm out, nothing else." I take a friend over there with me to scout it and ensure that he has actually left. When we get there, we discover that not only had he left a ton of food and furniture, but he had ripped all of the fire alarms out of the ceilings. He had unscrewed and removed the deadbolt to the front door, and left them lined up neatly on the front table. We then realized that my front door can only lock by using a key from the outside, and it had been locked when we arrived, meaning Kyle still had a key. We called a locksmith immediately. Even after changing the locks, I was still terrified to stay there alone afterwards, and never went to sleep at night without barricading the doors with chairs and other furniture. To this day I still fear for his safety. He was obviously psychologically unstable, but also wonder what could have happened if I hadn't been as lucky as I was. Uninvited roommate. This story happened to me and my GF, now fiancé. To give you some context, she and I met online in 2015 and fell in love. We communicated via Skype for 3 years because we lived in separate countries until I came to live with her in February 2018, so a few weeks or so before I flew to meet her, she had made friends with a group of guys in her hometown, and I got to meet them shortly after living with her. They ranged in age from 16 to 18, and they would come over to visit us very often because we lived close to the high school they attended. At first I found it a bit weird that they would always come over and take up so much of our time, but they turned out to be really good friends over time. One of them even agreed to be one of my groomsmen recently. But back then there was one in particular that always bugged me, Dan. As I mentioned earlier, the guys would come and visit and hang out with us a lot, but Dan was the one that would always take up most of our time. I say this in the sense that he would message us early almost every day asking if we were home and if he could come over, and would proceed to spend almost the entire day, from morning to night, or early afternoon to night, depending on his work schedule, at our place. He would also go out of his way to meet us and bump into us wherever we went, whether it was the store, a coffee shop, or any other place you could think of. While I found this annoying, there wasn't anything particularly creepy or weird going on yet. Mind you, we live in a small town where it's almost impossible to not run into someone you know on the way to buy groceries or something like that. Plus I had only known him for about as long as my fiancé had known him, which wasn't a very long time, so I thought I was maybe judging him too harshly. Also, he was in a long-distance relationship with a girl from another country whom he was hoping to meet in real life just like me. So I could at least relate to him in that aspect. I decided to let it slide, but made a note to keep an eye out for any suspicious behavior. The problems seemed to start once he also started trying to incorporate himself into other aspects of our life. He would make friends with anyone we'd been friends with for a long time, tag along with us whenever we were gonna meet up with said friends even though he hadn't been invited, hang out with them without us knowing, etc. My favorite instance, and the one that made me become more suspicious with him, was one time when we were going to hang out with some long-time friends of my fiancé. As the friend had finished her shift and we were getting ready to get into her car to drive over to her place, Dan suddenly shows up and joins us to their place uninvited. It was just so off-putting that he would just invite himself over without our friends or even our permission. Then when we were done there and walking home, the 3 of us passed his house. We lived further away at the time, and assumed he'd go home. But no. He kept tagging along with us with the excuse that he needed to buy something at the store. Which was bullshit, since all stores had been closed for over an hour and he knew it. So he kept walking with us until at one point when we were almost home we put our foot down and told him that we were tired and just wanted to go to sleep as soon as we got home, and told him to go home. It took us 10 minutes to convince him, during which he would react to our requests with awkward and creepy silences until he finally headed home, annoyed. My fiancée, concerned that she'd offended him, asked if he wanted to hang out with us later in the week. What followed was various weeks of him coming over to our place, staying until late at night, and him slowly leaving more and more of his stuff at our place so he'd have an excuse to come over. I shit you not, he once brought over his PS3 with a bag of 30 or so games, which stayed there for 3 months. It got to the point where people thought he'd moved in with us, hence the title. He also seemed to have problems with all our friends. Among other things, he would get into arguments with our friends and told one friend who was goofing around at our place once that he'd kill him if he didn't shut up. He lied to us and made us believe that two good friends of ours wanted to report us to the police for drugging our friends. I mentioned earlier that some of them were 16 at the time. He allegedly hit one of our friends GF once. This was never confirmed, but I have no reason to believe it's a lie, etc. It was like he wanted us all to himself and to isolate us from our friends. The last thing he did, which ended up being the key to us getting rid of him forever, was that he started dating my fiance's cousin, MJ. He broke up with his long-distance GF under suspicious circumstances and started dating her. As a result, whenever MJ came to visit, Dan would come along as well. My fiancé wanted to hang out with MJ. There was Dan. Even when he was dating someone else, his obsession with us never ended. My roommate is a huge creep, so I live in supported housing. This means that I basically have a room in a house that I share with others who have learning disabilities. When my best friend moved in, this one particular tenant, who we soon started to call Creeper, full-on stalked her. He would lurk outside her room late at night, waiting for her to come out. If she didn't come out, he would outside and knock her window. He would watch her come out of the shared bathroom from the top of the stairs. He's tried to kiss her, and one time touched her on the shoulder and said he was looking after her when a support worker asked what he was doing. He's also waited on the stairs when her and I came back from a trip out at like 11:30 at night. Needless to say, we waited round the side of the building until he went away. He's also watched her through his blinds, and he's been warned at least 3 times by support workers to leave her alone. Now here's the worst part. He's 45, she's 22. And he has a girlfriend who he's been with for 10 years. But he doesn't like her very much, judging by the frustrated phone calls he has with her on the daily. Now, he also displayed a milder form of this behavior when I moved in, but he started leaving me alone within a few months. But the difference with my friend is he is infatuated with her. So not only is he emotionally and physically trying to cheat on his girlfriend who he doesn't even seem to like, but he's been doing it since my friend moved in, which was at the beginning of the year. He needs to be charged with sexual harassment, and his GF needs dump him. He needs to be thrown out of the house too. But his special needs seem to give people an excuse not to have him punished, and I'm sick of it. If it weren't for whatever he has, he'd be in prison. I wanted to share this because I'm done with him. I want him to leave my friend alone. I want him out of the house. The staff aren't doing anything about it, so I'm going to take matters into my own hands. But what should I do? The friend my roommate brought home, I love, let's not meet. Here's my most crazy encounter for you all. So about 3 years ago I was going to school in a US city and was living with 2 other roommates. My one roommate was known to usually bring seedy characters back to the apartment. At one point during our fall semester she befriended a guy in her advertising class who went by the name of Dallas. He became her weed dealer, and she would frequently bring him over to the apartment. I suspected they were sleeping together, but she denied it. It was a strange relationship, but who am I to judge? My other roommate and I thought he was charismatic enough, but also didn't see the appeal that Christy, my roommate who befriended him, saw. I remember one night we had Dallas over for dinner. He told us how he played for our college's football team, that he just started his own business at the age of 25. He was a very well-known weed dealer who made a shit ton of money. And his name was Dallas because he used to live in Dallas, Texas, and his parents named him after that. Me and my other roommate nodded our heads and listened, but we didn't think much of it except for this dude thought he was hot shit and wanted to gloat about himself. Mind you, he was like 5 feet 4 inches and probably not over 150 pounds. I believe he came over for dinner or something, maybe 1 or 2 other times. My roommate claimed that one time she decided to buy weed from him and went to his apartment off campus. When she arrived she saw our roommate, Christy, just passed the fuck out on a chair in the middle of day, in Dallas's apartment, in some random room. When my roommate arrived, he mentioned nothing of her being there. My roommate shook her awake and Christy just woke up in a haze and basically told my roommate to fuck off. My roommate recounted the story to me and we both agreed it was fucking weird and Dallas was probably not the safest person to hang with. After a couple months, Christy stopped hanging with him. I remember her saying he got pissed she didn't want to sleep with him. I also found out that a friend of hers, who knew him for a long time, was engaged to him. Oh, also, his real name wasn't Dallas. Shocker there. Fast forward 2 years. Me nor my roommate talk to Christy anymore. We are living elsewhere in said city, doing our own thing. We get an alert on our phones that a girl who had just transferred to our college went missing after leaving from one of the campus bars the previous night. It doesn't take long, maybe a few days, when this huge story breaks. This girl was killed by someone she left the bar with that night. My roommate calls me and goes, "Dude, do you remember what Dallas's real name was?" I go, "Yeah, I believe it was said name." She goes, "Go online and read this article. He fucking killed that girl who just went missing." Sure enough, I go online and there is the most horrifying mugshot of Dallas, next to a photo of the girl he had just slain. It gets crazier. Apparently he had taken her home that night, an attempt at a one-night stand sort of deal, I assume, and I guess at one point things turned bad, and he killed her by blunt force and strangulation. If that isn't terrible enough, he cleaned up the evidence, in his apartment, threw her body in a storage container, took a MF lift to his grandma's house hours away, and buried the storage container with her remains in it, on the property somewhere, after obtaining a video of the two of them leaving together from the bar. It didn't take cops long to bust his murdering ass. Weeks after the story broke, so many girls came forward and shared similar creepy stories about Dallas, the guy who played for said college's football and ran a successful business. You can guess that none of this was ever true. Also, he was like 28 years old, claiming he was still a student at our college when this happened, prying on younger women. My roommate didn't stop staring. After a few days it started. I would notice that he was always looking in my direction. I chalked it up to coincidence, but it kept happening. Classes started up and I spent less and less time in the room, but whenever I was in there he would be constantly looking in my direction. When I would turn to face him he would turn his head away, but it would creep me out since it was pretty much constant. I started noticing he would lay on his bed to read, but he would hold the book or papers at an angle that always gave him a direct line of sight to me. About a week or so into the semester, my GF at the time and I went on a morning hike and crashed on my bed at around 2 p.m. We woke up to him just standing there staring at us about 2 hours later. He didn't say anything, just turned and left the room. At that point I decided I needed to leave before he murdered me in my sleep and ate my face, and I was out of there pretty quickly. Fortunately I didn't see him again for quite a while, but we ended up having a class together senior year. I had been telling my friends the story ever since it happened and they didn't believe me. One of my friends had really poor vision, so we sat in the front row. Of course, every time I looked behind me my old roommate was staring directly at me. Not the teacher, but at me. It didn't matter if we were on the middle or on one of the sides. I challenged them to look back a single time during the semester and catch him not looking at me. Within 5 classes they gave up and agreed that he was staring at me non-stop and he was super creepy. My parents think he was in love with me, but I still think he wanted to murder me in my sleep and eat my face. Edit. I forgot to mention I told him in the first few days to please stop staring at me and he denied doing it. My roommate claimed to be a witch. I noticed a lot of crazy roommate stories, so I thought I would share mine. This happened summer of 18. I had just finalized a divorce and moved back to my hometown. My parents let me stay at their place until I found my own. I had just started a high-paying job, but I was in such debt from the divorce that I wasn't ready to pay for a place of my own. I didn't want to mooch off my parents, so I decided to find a roommate for the interim. I found a sweet woman, Raquel, about 15 years older than me, who wanted someone to move in for only 3 to 4 months. This was perfect for me since I was still paying off debt. Everything about Raquel was such a delight. She was sweet, very clean, cared about the environment, volunteered, and would cook me food just because. I thought I had hit the jackpot with her. However, there were a few things about Raquel that were a little off. She wouldn't tell me what she did for a living. She said it was confidential. Whatever her job is, it caused her to be gone for days, sometimes weeks, at a time. I thought maybe she worked for the government because she had a framed photo of her with Bush Jr. in the Oval Office. When I asked her about it, she said, "That was my last day before leaving the Secret Service." Even though this was odd, I was very impressed. She had a very strict rule. Every door in the house, including my room, had to be open at all times if it wasn't being occupied. However, this rule didn't apply to her room. Her door was to remain closed at all times whether she was there or not. And obviously I was never allowed to go in. Odd but not too concerning, she claimed to be wicked. I don't know much about the practice, but she was really into it. She was constantly going to a nearby wicked store and buying all the books and garnishes. Besides these few things, she was a very normal person. A month went by without a concern. I should quickly mention she had 2 cats. They would mostly stay in her room, but when they wanted out they would hit the door with their paws. My room was right next to her southwest. The sound would drive me crazy. If she wasn't home and I heard the cats trying to get out, I would open her door just enough so they could run out. I know this breaking the rules, but it drove me crazy. Everything got too weird one night when she was out of town for work. It was the first night of her being gone. I was sitting in my room watching TV when I started to hear what sounded like the cats hitting her door trying to get out. I thought, great. She forgot to let the cats out before leaving. I opened my door to go let them out of her room when something made me stop dead in my tracks. The cats were just chilling in the hallway. They weren't in the room, but I know I heard something. Already creeped out, I decided to open her door and peek inside. What I saw were 4 people, naked, holding hands in a circle. With their heads bowed as if they were praying, I noped the fuck out of there and headed to my parents. I tried calling Raquel, but I couldn't get her. Right when I was about to call the police, she finally called. She was livid. She said I broke her only rule and she wanted me out immediately. Fine by me. The eerie part was when I got my bed and dresser back, there was a weird symbol carved in the wood that wasn't there before. The only way I can describe it is it was like A+, but instead of straight lines, they were curved. Like if someone cut an oval in half down the middle then tried to make A+. Not sure what that's supposed to mean, and I don't think I want to know. So yeah, crazy witch lady, let's not meet again. Roommate wanted, female only. This is a popular story with my family and most of my friends. Amanda is my brother's girlfriend. At the time of this story, she was looking for her first apartment and moving out from her parents' house. Her and my brother didn't want to move in together since they had only dated for a few months. She opted instead to search for a roommate online. Browsing Craigslist, she found an ad titled something like, "Roommate wanted, females only." This sort of thing was common since the area she was looking in was mostly young professionals. The listing was for a room in a house for about $225 a month, which was quite cheap compared to the most places listed. The occupant listed herself as a 23-year-old college student that wasn't comfortable with living with any males. The other roommate would have their own room and attached bathroom. So far, Amanda was into this place. However, the listing only had a single photo from outside the property. Amanda sent an email wanting to meet the occupant and tour the house. Within 30 minutes, she receives an email back with all the details and time to stop by. The girl worked late hours and wanted Amanda to stop by at 8 p.m. When Amanda arrives, there is a handwritten note on the front door saying, "Door broken, use back door." Walking around the house, it looks nice but slightly unkempt, tall grass, weeds, dusty windows, etc. Still no alarms for Amanda though. When she knocks on the back door and an older man opens the door. At first Amanda thinks she has the wrong house, but the man reassures her and says that the occupant, I forget the name, was out and he was the landlord. The occupant asked him to meet Amanda since she was working late. He seemed pleasant and offered to show her around. Alarms start going off but aren't at red alert yet. First, the guy was clearly in his 40s, unshaven, and looked like he lived in his car. Also, only the kitchen light was on. As they walked around the house, Amanda noticed one huge red flag: no furniture. Nothing. The landlord was polite about answering questions but seemed irritable to keeping lights on for too long, rushing her around and only letting her look at rooms for a few moments. There was a single room that the landlord wouldn't open, telling her that it was the occupant's room and he didn't want to invade her privacy. As they walk down the hallway into the living room, she notices the front door has a plank nailed across it. Broken for sure, Amanda's creepometer is started to ding, so she decides to wrap up the walkthrough and leave, but trying to polite. As she's giving the guy her "thanks for the showing" bit, he perks up and states that he forgot to show her the basement. It's recently furnished and would be a great rec room, and she should take a look down there. At the time, Amanda and the landlord are standing in the small hallway between the front living room and the back kitchen. In this little hallway was the basement door. When he opens the door, it opens outward to create something of a barrier between Amanda and the back door. The basement is pitch black. He smiles, motions down the stairs, and says, "Ladies first." What happens next is nothing more than a stroke of luck. Amanda get a text just as some random person parks in front of the house. Thinking on her feet, she pretends it's a phone call and answers her phone. Hey. Yeah, are you here? I'll come out from around back and let you in. It's great, you have to see it. With a motion of confidence, she excuses herself around the landlord and walks out of the back door. She says the guy just looked at her like he was confused. Once outside, she sprinted to her car and sped like hell out of there. When Amanda got home, she told her mother and my brother everything. Cops were called, they took her statement, and went to investigate. The Craigslist post had been removed. Epilogue: the house had been foreclosed over 6 months earlier and the property had been abandoned. When the police investigated, they found that the closed room the landlord didn't want her to look in was where the man had been staying. There was a pile of old dirty blankets, rotten food, and empty gallon jugs everywhere. More creepy was he had plastered ripped up pages from porno mags on all the walls in the room. Where do they even find porno mags? The really scary part of this was the basement. The man had tied a thin piece of fishing twine at about chin level across the stairs about halfway down. The basement was empty except another pile of old blankets, a broom handle wrapped in leather belts, and a small box with a few rolls of assorted tape, duct, electric, etc. Amanda ended up not moving in.